All right, so for this second essential, we're only going to be doing the Khan Academy. It's going to be a little bit challenging just because they're word problems. So that's why we're kind of giving you 45 minutes on just this because you're going to probably have to work through these multiple times. Even if you went straight through and got 4 right in a row, I'd suggest doing it again. Just so you get to see as many different kind of problems as you can to be as ready as you can be for the quiz. Okay, so with all of these, sometimes they'll give you a diagram and sometimes they won't. Okay, if they do not give you a picture, I would suggest always drawing a picture. Okay, so if they give you a picture, awesome, it's set up, you're ready to go. If they don't give you a picture, then you should make your own every single time. Okay, so in this one, there isn't a picture, so I'm going to draw a picture over here in this screen. So it says Steve is turning half of his backyard into a chicken pen. His backyard is 24 meters by 45 meters, and it's a rectangle. Okay, so I know it's a rectangle, so his backyard is rectangular. So I'm going to draw a rectangle. I know it's a little dark. I apologize. But I think it'll work. So it's 24 by 45, so I'll just try to draw it as accurately as I can, right? So that'll be my 24. That'll be my 45. Just like that. He wants to put a chicken wire fence that stretches diagonally from one corner to the opposite. So it's going to go from here over to there, right? So he's going to put a fence from one corner to the other corner. It says how many meters of fence will Steve need? So he's going to go to the store. He's going to buy some fencing. He needs to know how much to buy. He doesn't want to overbuy. He doesn't want to underbuy either, right? So to figure this out, you can see if I just transferred this 24 over to here, I now have the Pythagorean theorem. I have this triangle. In all of these, we're going to figure out somehow how to create a triangle. Just make sure you're paying attention. Don't just draw generic triangles and start putting numbers on it. That's the biggest mistake I see students make, is they just make a generic triangle, start putting numbers on it and trying to figure it out. Because you have to know, sometimes in the scenario they give you, sometimes the numbers they give you will be the hypotenuse. Sometimes it'll be just the legs, right? So drawing an accurate picture is important. In this one, I'm going to make this screen a little bigger to help us out, because at this point we're going to just be doing the work over here, and then we'll put the number back in. Okay, so we're looking for this hypotenuse of the right triangle. So I'm going to create these squares off each side. Now these are going to get a little bigger when I create these squares. So one thing I can do is I can get a calculator to do that work for me. Okay, so what I'm going to do is in my calculator, and I also know I'm going to add them together. Let's see if I can get I had this earlier. And I know I'm going to add them together, so I'm going to do it all at the same time. Okay, so I'm just going to put in 45 squared and 24 squared and add them together. My calculator has a squared button, so I'm going to use the squared button. But you can also just multiply them by themselves and add them together at the same time too, right? But I think it'll be easier to use the squared button, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm putting in 24 squared, right? And then I'm going to add to that 45 squared. I'm trying to move it so that way we can see it. There we go. And I'm going to hit enter, and the answer is 2,601. Now, if you remember now, if we look back here at this, remember, we're looking for this distance here. And this is in this application where we need to contemplate what's going on here. Okay, so if my output here is 2,601, what I'm going to recognize is that's the area of this big square, right? Because like I said, I'm still seeing from time to time students who are forgetting to take the square root to get the side length here. But in this, if I just take a second and think about the reasonableness of that number, right, I'll see that doesn't make sense. If this is 45 and this is 24, this one being over 2,000 meters long doesn't make sense. It's way too big. And that's kind of your indicator. Oh, that's right, because to go from the area of a square back down to its side length, one of the side lengths of the square, what we do is we take the square root. So I'm just taking 2,601. I'm going to take the square root of that. I got my calculator out here, and I know that's not on my chart, so I'm going to just use my calculator. So I'm hitting the seconds. On my calculator, I hit the second, and then the square root button's right there. And then it makes the little square root symbol, okay? And then I'm just putting in the 2,601 and hitting enter, and the answer is 51. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and type that in, but before I hit submit, I'm going to look to make sure, because they kind of will ask you different things. So we got to make sure the number I found is is what they're actually asking for, because they'll ask for different kinds of numbers. So it just says how many meters of fencing will they need. Yep, so in this situation that makes sense, because this is already, I'm assuming that this is already fenced in, and I only need to put a fence across this. So I'm going to hit check. I might be wrong, because I might have to fence in the whole thing. I guess they weren't really clear on that. So I'm assuming we just need this fence, but if it doesn't say right, then the next thing I'm going to try is I'm going to add in these two other numbers to fence in that whole chunk. So let's see. That's what they wanted. Okay, so just kind of think through what they're asking and what your outputs are going to be. For this one, I have done a couple of them, and they do ask you to round to the nearest tenth. Remember, a tenth is 1 decimal place. And for this, we have to be accurate. Okay, so use a calculator. If you look up here on the screen, they provide you a calculator. So you can just use their calculator. Let's just pop it open. And there's the square root button right here, right? So we could put in the square root of 2,601 right here as well, right? And that's what that looks like on their calculator. Oh, maybe I gotta close the parentheses. Yep. So, and they require you to close it on this calculator. Okay. So if you have any questions, again, shoot me an email. Come to one of the sessions. This is a pretty big component, is the actual application point of this. So make sure you're really understanding this.